And now part 1 of a special masterclass on applique with your hosts Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to the QUILT Show, everybody. We are taping from our homes today. I'm in California in my master bedroom, and Ricky, you're in La Veta, Colorado.
I absolutely am. And you know, Alex, today's show is a masterclass on applique. And when I think back to when I started, piecing was my thing because I just failed at applique horribly. And so for years, I did piecing, but then I realized I was leaving out half of my options because applique is a wonderful thing for quilters and we need to know how to do both.
And so here's the thing. We are going to present many different ways that you can do it, and you figure out what works for you. I mean, that's the bottom line. But we must start with Becky Goldsmith because she is a gold mine for making applique easy, from preparing your applique to getting the sharpest of points.
So Becky,
Yes.
I know that there's many ways to do applique.
Yes.
And you're going to take us through the entire process of how you do it today.
It's a piece of cake.
It is a piece of cake. So let's start. First of all, I'm sure that there's a pattern.
There's a pattern.
All right. And this pattern would be in your book or?
Yes, it's in the book. You have to make some copies to make it big, but all the instructions are in the book.
Okay. So you have a large pattern.
Yes.
And that pattern then gets transferred on the copies, like you said.
Yes.
And then
What you've got in your hand are the copies to make the templates for this particular block. So you take the big copies and cut them out so that the shapes are surrounded by just a little bit of paper.
right. So if you look at the edge where this has been cut out, there's, I would call it seam allowance for paper.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. So that's been left.
Right.
Now, this is where your process kind of takes me into a new direction. So
What I'm going to do is make templates without using template plastic. What I do is use that one.
we'll talk about this one in a minute.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is take the clear adhesive laminate and this.
And where do you get that?
Usually you can get it in an office supply store. Sometimes you can find it online. We have it on our website. It's a single-sided, self-sticky plastic. And I'm just going to set that over there for now.
Hello?
It's sticky side up, not down.
Okay, yeah, because we would have
You'd be
laminate right there on the
right
tabletop.
there on the table. Now I'm going to reach in front of you for just
Okay.
a minute and grab one of these sheets. What I'm going to do is take what is going to be a template. I'm going to turn it face down onto the laminate, cup it in the center, and set it down.
Okay.
You fit as many pieces as you can. This one could use a little more trimming, but we'll just put that like that. You put as many as you can onto this sheet.
All right, and that's what you've done
That's what I've
here.
done there.
So this particular sheet now has all of as many pieces as you could get on it. Now,
Exactly
I have to
so.
tell everybody, in our rehearsal before this, I'm like all excited about this, so I grab I pull the laminate back, I take it and I drop this template on there, and I want you to look.
Oh, it's
It's stuck. It's stuck. It's a big mess. Although
is.
you say it's salvageable.
It is salvageable.
Okay. So do it her way. Cup it and drop it down. Don't do it my way, or you're having to cut more laminate and try to piece it together.
Exactly.
All right. So take it from the expert, not from me. Although I think I've got it all stuck together
well,
again.
I was trying to sneak underneath and put the cover sheet on the sticky
All
part
right.
because that stuff is really sticky.
It is sticky.
Okay, once you get it stuck down, you're going to cut out your templates. Now, the easiest way to do this is to trim away.
Yeah, you're rough cutting it.
I'm rough cutting
Okay.
it because it's easier to cut if it's small. Take off the backing sheet and then trim your templates.
All right. While you're trimming that template, and you're wanting to do that right on the line.
Right, split the line.
Split the line. Tell me about this template. What is this? A plastic? What did you call it again?
This is a peel and stick laminate.
A laminate.
It's
Tell
a
me
laminate.
why the laminate is important.
Well, for one thing, it's much easier to cut than template plastic. The other thing is that you're working off of a mechanical copy of the pattern, which is more accurate than you will ever be tracing onto template plastic.
Okay.
But the other reason is more subtle. When you're using a template, when you're tracing around it for applique, template plastic has a height to it. And that height tends to push the edge of the chalk pencil away from the edge of the template. So these are a very flat, low template, it makes it easy to get a good edge.
I'm going to guess one final bonus of doing that is that it lets you use it over and over and over, and the paper's not falling apart.
Yeah, well, yeah.
With age and time and all the abuse that you give it when you're drawing around it.
Exactly
Okay, so that's how you treat getting all of your templates for your applique, right?
Yes.
Now we're moving to the background. We're going
Yeah.
to leave the applique for just a moment and talk about the background, how you go about piecing this sort of. Now your book is called Appliqué Outside the Lines,
Outside the
and I'm
Lines.
guessing this is sort of piecing outside the lines too.
It is.
All right.
Exactly. It's so that you let go of the ruler, which sounds easy, but it's I know, but it's scary. It can be scary for people,
At
right?
the first time they've been married to that ruler
It's
and all
hard.
of that.
Yes. So what the easiest way that I have found to do it is to work with relatively small pieces of fabric. As you can see in the quilts that I've done, I like more activity in the background rather than less activity. So you overlap the pieces however much you want them overlapped. You take your rotary cutter and you cut. Now what I find is sometimes it's easier to backtrack just a little bit so that you don't have a hump of fabric in front of your
that's a
cutter when
good
you
tip.
push it forward. You can cut even a gentle curve here.
Right, and I noticed that both of these pieces of fabric are right side up,
Yes.
which is what I sort of teach in my improvisational method. Get them the way you're going to see them before you cut them.
Otherwise, if you cut any kind of a curve, it's not going to fit
That's
when
true.
you sew it. Now, these things,
They'll slough off.
yeah, that's trash. I don't save those. Do you save
Well,
those?
you could if you wanted. If
Somebody
you've got a
could.
friend that wants to use those, but I'm more interested in this.
This is what
Okay.
I like. Okay, so now you would take these, turn them right sides together, sew them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
Right, so that would go right together. You'd sew it, and then
you'd have
ta-da,
that. Ta-da.
it's sewn.
And then you decide what you want next.
Okay.
And if you want this next on one side or the other, you would take this, overlap it, turn it so it's easy to cut.
And you cut it, take off the extra, and then sew it together.
Same old. Yeah.
All right, now we've got a sample here that's a different colorway, but it's all done improvisationally.
Exactly.
With big chunky fabrics. And do you do this up on a design wall? Do you make your decisions?
I do. I put things as they're building on the design wall so that I'm sure that if I use a fabric that is going to stick out a little more, it doesn't stick out too much.
That's great. All right. So now let's move down here and talk about,
Okay.
You've got to get your applique positioned onto the background.
Yes, you do.
All right. And you've got a special way for doing that. Tell us about it.
I use upholstery vinyl. Right here I've got one already drawn. You take the vinyl and trace it on the pattern. You get an exact copy of the pattern. On the background, when it's constructed, I press the backgrounds in half, horizontally and vertically, and on our patterns we have a horizontal and vertical grid as well. So you use that grid to line.
The creases that you've pressed.
Yes,
That's
exactly
great.
so. So you can pin this in place if you want to or not. I hold it in place on top of my sandboard to keep the applique background from shifting.
Okay, you said sandboard. We're not seeing that, so peel that back and show us what's under there.
I have a different sandboard there.
Okay.
Yeah. So that keeps the background from shifting while I'm manipulating the applique in place on top of it. You would lift the overlay up, put the piece underneath, put it back down, pin it in place.
Great. Now you've got that one leaf positioned right now.
Yes.
And it probably, the template said number 13, and there's leaf
And there's
number 13.
leaf number 13.
And how critical is it that you put that leaf exactly in that spot?
It depends on the block. It really does. For the blocks that we're working on and that specifically we're talking about today, it really only matters if the center stem is pretty much where it needs to be. Otherwise, it might look like the flowers falling over.
Right.
But for these leaves, you use the guide as a rough guide. You can, if I wanted to put this leaf over here instead of over here, I could do that.
Good. Give us permission to change it a little bit.
Change it as much as you want.
All right, so now we know where it's going to get positioned, and we're not going to stitch that leaf onto that big background, but you want to show us some of the magic, how you do your
How we got
hand
to
stitching.
there.
And Erin's going to get in here, and we're going to just let you work your magic on your
All right.
beautiful needle turn applique
you.
stitch.
All right, well, I've traced around the template onto the fabric. Before I positioned this on the fabric, I finger pressed the leaf.
You did, and I want you to tell me about this sandboard here.
This sandboard here is what I would use with the template. When you trace around the template onto the fabric, the sandpaper underneath keeps the fabric from shifting
I
as you
think
trace.
that is a fantastic idea. Do y'all do that? Do you applique people already know that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm in the dark ages then.
This is true even if mostly you piece. If you ever find yourself having to make a line, put some sandpaper underneath there.
That's very cool.
When I'm tracing around this, I would use I make a line that you can see, always. I
Really
know
heavy.
Really heavy. I know that a lot of appliqueurs don't do that, but if I can't see it, I can't turn it under well. The edge of the line that really matters is the inside edge of the line, where it touches the template.
Because that's the true sewing
That's
line.
what you're after.
And so that line is going to get in the seam allowance.
It is part of the seam allowance. So when I cut this out, I added a 3/16 inch seam allowance, a little bit smaller than 1/4 of an inch, measuring from the inside edge of the chalk.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
So then you pick it up, finger press. If, for those of you who applique, if you have ever done this, you know how important it is to put the crease in the fabric before you pin it on your block. It really helps. When you get to a point, you finger press beyond the point.
Do you find some fabrics work better than others for...
I almost always use cotton.
Right.
I always pre-wash my cotton.
But we've got batik cotton and then loose weave cottons and regular...
They'll all take a finger
Okay,
press.
good.
They really will, and they'll remember.
Okay.
For kind of a long time. So I would finger press this whole thing. I would use the overlay or whatever, and I would pin it to my piece.
Okay.
So here it is pinned. I've got to put my glasses on so I can see. And I'm using cotton thread. I'm using Superior's Masterpiece here.
Okay.
All right. When you begin sewing a piece like this, on a point that is going to ultimately be turned, you don't start there.
Right.
Start on a relatively flat part. Always bring your needle up from underneath the edge of the applique, never from the background, because you've got a tail of thread that will show otherwise.
And you're on the inside edge of that chalk mark.
Exactly so. Now, it's called needle turn applique because mostly you use your needle to turn it under. If ever you need to use your fingers, park your needle.
Oh, where did you park it?
Oh, I just poked it in right there.
Okay, that's
Sometimes
good. I like
poke
that.
it in
Parking
over there.
the needle. I
Park
like
the needle.
that.
Oh, it's funny. You know what my children, as they were growing up, if they had something important to tell me, they'd say, "Mom, park your needle."
Park your needle.
It cracks
That's
me
great.
up. They still do that. Okay, so here's the stitch. Where your thread has come out of the edge of the applique, you go in next to the applique, not to the right, not to the left.
Right there
I'm-
at it.
Right there at it. I'm hitting the middle finger of my bottom hand.
Okay.
My right hand is going to fall to the right. The needle tracks across my underneath finger from right to left. I'm bending over it and catching the applique on the upward stitch.
Just a thread or two, huh?
Well, it depends on the weave of the fabric.
Okay.
You know, if the thread shows too much, you've got too much. If it pulls a piece of thread free, you didn't catch enough. All right, so here we go. And it's one stitch at a time. It's important to keep an eye on your seam allowance, make sure you've turned it under. You can work a little bit of it in advance in most places. If you have trouble seeing where the threads come out of the edge of your applique, pull it out away so you can see it.
That's really great. And you're also not actually bringing that thread underneath the edge of that. You're trying to get it right there.
I prefer a crisper edge. That's a good catch. Some appliqueurs do like to begin their stitch on the underside of the applique. It gives you a more rounded edge to your applique. I like it crisp, so I start at the edge. I think it's easier to see too.
I like this. I think this is
you.
great. So you work that all the way up to the point?
Yes,
Turn the point. I don't know that we have time to get all the way up to that point, but the very...
I could show you how to turn
they
the
just
point.
scoot on up to the point.
All right. As you approach the point, you want to shorten your stitch length just a little bit because there's going to be bulk in the seam allowance. And it'll push up if you don't shorten your stitch. It doesn't look good. Before you turn the point, when you are right at the finger pressed fold that marks the second side of the point, stop and do a tack stitch.
Okay, now tack stitch is just across?
Just a stitch in place.
Okay.
It's like you go down, you go back up. And what that stitch does is keep the first stitches on the first side of the point from loosening as you manipulate the fabric under on the second side of the point.
Okay.
Now I'm going to use my very special toothpick that I have dampened to raise the grain of the wood.
Now, is it really special?
Yeah, it's like I can tell you, I get them from Cracker Barrel. I go in and buy them by the case.
Okay, so there is
It's the perfect. It's not.
It's not a Joe generic toothpick.
No, it's cute.
Okay, all right.
It's
I
a
got
cute
it. All right,
toothpick.
all right.
Okay, so I'm going to place the toothpick on top of the fold. The point of the toothpick is even with the seam allowance at the edge. I am pushing down and pivoting. Now, what most people do to mess up their points happens regardless of how you get to here. If you ever find yourself starting here then and moving backwards, you're going to have a mess.
Right.
What you want to have happen is the seam allowance to fold under smoothly and work away from the point. So I alternate bringing it under like this and then reaching underneath with the toothpick. Anything that gets wadded up gets smoothed away. If you happen to pull under too much,
Oh, and when you pull that, look
brings
at
it
that.
right out into sharp. And then you can make a stitch off the end. I tend not to do that. Whoops. Glad I didn't unthread that.
Boy,
Aren't you too? Yeah, okay.
no,
So
that looks fantastic.
all right, so you just sew down the second side the same way you worked your way out.
And then you're going to go. How about that, everybody? Yeah? Thank you,
you.
Becky. That's
Thank you
wonderful.
very much.
All right. Now, you've got the big version, but here's the little version. Here's the big ta-da of this wonderful block. And I know that you can get Becky's books with Linda and Piece of Cake Designs, and you can go to town doing this wonderful, wonderful applique. I actually forgot about her parking the needle. That is such a great idea. So many great things from Becky Goldsmith. She's been a guest on the show several times, and she's just a fabulous teacher. I'm so glad that she was with us.
Me too. Well, up next, the Princess of Perfection, Kay Buckley, shows you how she achieves perfect circles and perfect stems.
Welcome back, everyone. You know, quilters can also be very innovative. Kay Buckley is not only an amazing applique artist, but she's also been very inventive with her techniques.
She totally makes the process easier. Now, we actually have two different segments we're going to mash up together for you to see. One is on perfect circles and the other is on perfect stems. Take a look.
All right, well, let's get down to business working on these perfect circles, all right? Tell us all about what you've come up with and how to do it.
Well, like I said, I really want them to be well done. And in the beginning, I tried to just needle turn under a perfect circle. I couldn't do it to save my life. And it was never, I wasn't satisfied.
You just weren't satisfied.
Yeah, and I kept thinking, how do I do this? So the process, I actually found a company that would cut these for me. So they're stamped out, so they're perfect when they're stamped. And so on this ring, when you buy this package of perfect circles, there are 4 of every size, and there's 15 sizes. So there's 60 circles in that package, and you get the ring.
Okay.
And then the idea is you're looking for the size that matches your pattern.
And the ring's going to help you keep them together and not get them lost or in a drawer or flying around.
As organized as I am, because you saw my fabric.
I did. I saw the fabric.
But look at this. They're all different sizes. Now, I have people, when they buy these, my friends, they keep them in order by size.
Okay.
But
well, that's what I would do.
Yes, I know.
Because everybody knows me and how well organized I am.
So mine are just haphazardly put on there.
That's great.
But then once I've gotten the size, so let's say this is the size that we've decided that we need for our pattern. I'm going to grab it here. I'm going to grab a piece of fabric. I happen to just sort of grab a batik for this demo, but I need you to know that this is going to be traced on the back of the fabric. So right side down.
So you're using some sandpaper here.
Yes, I really like this piece of sandpaper or sandpaper board under my fabric because I find that then when I lay this down to trace around it, my fabric doesn't move.
That's good.
Another one of my little
things. But it's a good thing.
Just makes my life easier. And then when I hold on to it to trace, the fabric really stays in place. But you don't want a really heavy grid. It's just kind of a little bit of a grip onto it. And then I'm going to trace. And we're marking on the back of the fabric, so truthfully, it doesn't matter whether this washes out of the fabric or not, because nobody's going to see it because it's on the back. And I happen to pick up these sew line markers. I use these often. And I think the reason why I like them a lot is there's different colors. There's a pink, a green, a yellow, a white, so that no matter what fabric I'm marking, one of the colors is surely going to show up on there.
So you could really use anything that will work for you as long as it doesn't bleed through the fabric.
That's
the
it.
idea.
Like a blue washout marker, bad idea, because it bleeds down in, or like a Sharpie marker. Yeah, something like that. You don't want it to bleed out the other side.
Okay.
And then once I have it marked, I'm going to come in and cut. And I want to cut this so I have just a little bit under 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm just eyeballing it. This does not need to be done with any amount of perfection.
Okay.
This step.
Well, I think that if you've quilted for a half a week, you have an eyeball for a 1/4 inch.
Correct.
Yeah.
We're going to get this out of our way. And now the next thing I'm going to grab here is, and I pre-threaded so we didn't have to do that step
Thank
on
you,
camera.
yeah.
We'd be here for an hour because I
Right.
can't see anymore. I'm not sure what's happening, but as I'm getting older, it seems to me the eye of the needles are getting smaller.
You know, I think we're close to the same age, so
Yeah, I think we are
understand. I
too.
understand.
But I do want to thread. I always say no wimpy threads for this step. You don't want anything that will break easily. So I tend to go with a quilting thread or a 50 weight 3-ply sewing thread. But when I hand applique, I use very thin threads.
Do you
wouldn't
use
want-
silk?
I do not.
But
I
you just
use-
did like a 60 weight or a...
Yes,
Yeah.
a 60 weight cotton, and that would break. And so I need
Okay.
like to do what I'm going to do here.
Okay.
And then I am going to sew between the line I drew and the cut edge, right in the middle. And I don't need this to be perfect.
What did you just say?
This
I don't need
stitch.
this to be perfect? Are
Wait.
you kidding? You're perfect Karen Kay Buckley.
It'll be perfect.
I know
in the
what you mean.
end.
I know what
Yeah.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
I know you are. But yes, I don't have to really stress out that this stitch is even. It won't matter. But I don't want this to turn into a big basting stitch. That I find doesn't work well. So
Okay.
the stitch needs to be, I always say, on the smaller side.
Okay.
And I just do a little running stitch.
Now, let me ask, if you were to need to do a bunch of these guys, would you just mark a bunch of them first, trim the 1/4 inch next, and then just maybe sit down in a comfy chair and just do all of this basting?
I actually.
Or do you do them one at a time?
I do one at a time,
my
but I'll
God.
explain. But wait, it'll make sense. I
Okay,
swear,
all right,
it'll make sense in a minute. You'll understand why.
Okay.
All right, so once I have the running stitch finished, I'm going back to the circle that I used for tracing, and I'm going to place that down back on the fabric. And then I'm going to hold, I need to grab this, come on. I'm going to hold on with just a little bit of pressure, and then I'm going to pull as hard as I can. I mean
Oh,
hard.
look at that. That's why you wanted the strong thread.
And then it's going to wrap
Oh my
itself
gosh, look at that.
right up over the edge.
Look at that. Would you look at that? I hope you didn't blink because you would have
Yeah.
missed it.
And the reason why these were named perfect circles, how the name came about, was when I started entering my quilts and shows, every time I would get my evaluation back from the judges, on the comments, it would say perfect circles. I went,
Hey.
yes, great idea for the name. All right, so now we have it gathered, and then I'm going to show you on the back. I take the thread and pull it to the opposite side with, I call this the death grip. You
Okay.
do not want it to pop open. I do this in my non-dominant hand, and then with my dominant, I'm going to come around the edge, and I need to just give it a little rub. You cannot avoid the gathering,
Right.
but you do not want any of that to show on this edge.
Sure.
So I'm going to hold on really tight, drop it down onto my ironing surface, and then I sprayed a little bit of sizing into its own lid. And I like sizing more than starch. I experimented a good bit, and the starches were leaving a lot of residue, and also they were a little harder to sew through when I was hand appliquing.
Okay, that's interesting to know. You're the first person I've ever heard say that.
So I like the sizing because it's softer.
Okay.
So I paint it on, and then I'm going to bring my iron. I'm going to let it sit on here. The iron needs to be on a dry, medium heat setting. We're trying to get the moisture out, so we don't want any steam. And if you set your iron too high, you could warp these.
And you're still, we've been 20 seconds on that right now, and you're still there. Mm-hmm. But that's okay.
Yeah. Let me tell you when you set
25 seconds by now.
now,
Just
or
saying.
30. So let me tell you at home what I do. All right? Because this freaks a lot of people
I'm
out.
already freaking out.
When this one's drying and the iron is sitting on it, now I do the running stitch in the second one, because then I'm not just sitting here doing nothing.
That is because it's a medium heat?
Right.
And so it's not going to burn your, it's not going to scorch your surface or your project.
No.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
I lift it up, and I always touch it immediately. It's not that hot.
No, it's not.
yeah.
No, goodness gracious.
And then what you're going to do is come in, take this tail of thread, and I'm going to loosen it just so I see where it is. And then I walk my fingers down, and I won't lie, having fingernails is helpful.
Okay.
So you'll have to get some of those.
I'll have to get some tweezers.
And then I'm going to pull that out, because these are reusable. And I'm
That's the
not kidding.
beauty.
You will have these for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You buy them once, and then you're done. And then after I pull it out, I like to pinch right along the fold, and I'm going to grab this thread, and I'm gently going to pull on it, and then walk my finger down a little further, pull gently, a little further, and now I closed it back to the way it was pressed. And then I'm going to cut that thread and it is ready to be appliqued
Look
down.
at that. I'm going to put it right here.
And so this is the same process whether I'm hand or machine appliquing, because once the edge is turned under, then I hand appliqued for years and years and years and years, never even considered machine. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, well, that's turned under. I could just machine applique that edge. And then I started doing more machine applique.
And there's still a finesse to that as well. It still needs to look great.
Oh, yes.
So what's a perfect circle without a perfect stem? It just goes together like
Correct.
a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right?
Yes.
So let's take a look at this sample that we looked at in the last segment. You've got all different sizes.
Different lengths. Main thing we're looking at here, though, is the width. And
Okay.
so we have really skinny ones here. These are a little wider, and this gets wider, and then this one's even a little wider. So there's 4 different sizes based on their width. That's how I look at these. It's the width.
So you have 4 different sizes in this
There are
package.
5 different sizes.
Oh, 5,
I
okay.
only used 4 of them, though, on the project.
Okay, but I want to look
One
at
of them got missed.
Hey, people, look at this thing. I mean, that is not. What is that?
Well, so the idea is, what you're looking for is, you're looking at the width of these.
Yeah, but that's like a hair.
It's pretty small.
Okay.
But that's what it finished to.
Okay, right here?
here in this project.
Okay, so you pick the width that you
Correct.
want.
So once you know what your width is, then you want to measure it. And then I want to cut my fabric so it is 5 times that size.
So what you're talking is you measure across,
Width,
not
correct,
the length.
not the length. You're going
Okay.
for the width.
5 times. All right.
Right. And so once I have, and I've already done this, but since you showed those, I want to mention this. What I've done with this one is, because you see how when you bring them out of the package, they're a little bit curled?
Yeah, they're
a
bendy.
little hard to work with that way. So what I did was I brought this over to the iron. And I actually just laid it on here, and then I take my iron and just let it sit on here for a few seconds, and then that will flatten it so it doesn't have that big curl to it.
So you're pressing it into submission.
You got it.
All right. All right.
All
We
right.
got that.
And then we're gonna go ahead and cut.
You are an inventor, my friend.
I have ideas.
Yes, you do. Big ideas.
So what we're using today is this new, it's called the Perfect Adjustable Ruler. And when you buy it, you get 5 sections. And these sections are like puzzle pieces. And so Alex has some of the pieces over there. I only needed about 12 inches worth. So I have the first 6 inches, and then I have up to 12. And then there is this little, we call it the end cap piece. And so you're going to pop that, whatever you decide your length is, but they can be built up to 24 inches.
Great.
All right, and then I'm going to place this down, and I'm just going to turn this just a hair.
Now, you cut differently. We need to talk about this,
Yes.
okay?
Well, I've been doing this for, just want to say this quickly. I've been quilting for almost 35 years. And this is how old I am. When I started, the rotary cutter did not exist.
Well, me neither,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that was a real big deal.
And when I started cutting, I had a hard time controlling cutting away.
Okay.
I was wobbling. And so I found when I cut towards myself, which freaks some people out, I know, I have more control.
Okay.
I've never even come close to cutting myself, but I think people should do what's comfortable for them.
Right. Be
So-
safe, okay? Just be safe.
Correct. And then, so we're just taking a good guess, about 1 1/4 inches based on what I have here.
Okay, and how wide was that then?
About a quarter.
Okay.
Right. Now, the other thing I want to say before I continue, we're cutting these on grain. And if you look on that project, when we go back to it, see, we have some stems that curve, and they had to be cut on the bias of the fabric.
Then you have Mr. Straight Guy
You
right
got
there.
it. So the straight one is the one kind of I'm sort of playing with here, the idea of it.
Okay.
So I cut these on grain, but if
Okay.
I wanted them to curve, I had to start on a bias cut to make that easy to
Okay.
lay flat when I'm done. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold it in half so that they're right side out, and I'm going to give it a little press with my iron. And now I'm going to pick this up along with my perfect stem, and I'm going to slide it right into the fold.
All right.
And the next step, I'm heading to the sewing machine.
Okay, I'll get out of your way.
All right, need my glasses.
Of course. And I have to tell you guys at home, I had not seen this before. I thought I knew where Karen was going with this, but this is totally different. So what about the foot you're using?
All right, so we had to play a little bit today because normally when I'm sewing these at home, I'm sewing this with a number 10. It's a top or an edge stitching foot.
A Bernina.
Correct.
Okay.
And today we had to play with the zipper foot. And I'm going to tell you it works, but the number 10 is a much nicer foot to do this than the zipper foot.
And what kind of foot was it again? You said it.
It's a topward edge stitching foot.
Okay, and I'm sure all machines have that.
Yeah, and many of them do, and there's some are plastic, some are metal, but they have this guide that goes down and it makes it, they just stay closer to the bar. This sits a little further away than I would actually love if it was the real deal.
In a million years, I would not have brought the stem thing to the sewing machine. I would be afraid to do that.
Nothing to be afraid of.
Awesome.
The foot keeps you from sewing into it.
Okay, so there you go.
And just since Alex mentioned it, I'll say I have sewn into it on occasion.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Every once in a while. But you know what the good news is? Never ever broke a needle.
Okay.
So just a little nick in my bar, which I emery boarded out. All right, now, one of the things, we're doing a short little sample here today, so we just have this little guy, but want to say, if I had a stem that was longer than this bar, all I would do is, I would sew, we're going to pretend here, but I would keep sewing, you know, and the bar's coming down, but I would then...
Keep pulling it, gotcha.
Yeah, so I stop with the needle down, I lift the foot up, and I pull the bar towards me, so I can make really long strips. Then I'm coming in with my scissors, and I'm going to cut as close, and I'm not exaggerating, as close as you can possibly cut.
I wouldn't have done that either.
But don't cut through it.
But you win the ribbon, so I'm going to listen to you, okay?
We want to get rid of this extra fabric. You had to have it to do the sewing machine step, but now we don't want it there anymore. All right, so let's get some of this mess off of
And
here.
you're not afraid of it fraying and stuff like that?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No. And then I'm going to fold this over so you can see the back of this. I'm flipping this seam so that I just roll it a little bit so it's going to be what will become the back of our stem. I'm dipping my brush into the sizing. I'm going to moisten this with sizing, grabbing my iron. I still work on a dry medium heat. You could work with a higher heat on here, but I just leave it on the medium because that's a normal setting for me for what I do.
And why would you not just spray it?
Because it makes it really, then I get spray all over my ironing board cover.
Gotcha.
It's, for me, it was just easier to just apply it with a brush. And then I'm going to let this sit for a few seconds to dry. One of the questions I get asked a lot when I'm out teaching is, people say, once I press this, they want to know if I have to press the seam open on the back. Oh, don't.
No.
You'll be here until next year. No.
You'd be winning 5 ribbons.
Yeah, there's no reason to do it. And then I'm going to take this strip and just pull it out, and now I have this perfully even stem to put down to sew, either hand or machine applique.
I think they like it out there because they're kind of oohing and ahhing, yeah? Well, I used to have the metal bars, and then you'd burn yourself, and I would never have taken that to the sewing machine.
They get really hot.
Right.
And if you stowed into one of those, you would surely break your needle.
Yes.
But with these, it's a plastic. I actually worked with a company so that we could find something you could iron over that didn't warp or melt.
I have to say, both Ricky and I are always constantly surprised at all the new things quilters are coming up with. So thank you to Karen for all you do to make applique exciting and doable for so many.
I agree. And Alex, coming up next, we have the master of miniatures, Pat Hawley, and she's going to blow your mind with some of the techniques. Tiny, small. Oh my gosh, you don't want to miss this.
On the next Quilt Show, we're having an Appliqué, a celebration of all things applique.
We have searched deep into our treasure trove of great guests to share with you an Appliqué Masterclass show.
For example, remember when we learned about the game-changing Appliqué tools from Rosa Rojas?
Or when Sue Garman taught us new uses for the swimming pool noodles that we've never seen.
Or when Sue Nichols showed us how she makes her extraordinary applique borders.
I'm remembering how excited you got when Luzhin Newman sewed the tiniest applique dots by hand.
And what about when you, Ricky, showed us your double blanket stitch on your Rhapsody quilt?
We've got an hour packed with great inspiration and, even more importantly, great applique tips coming your way on the next Quilt Show. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're enjoying our mini masterclass on applique, and I'll tell you, there's so many techniques. Alex, do you remember the mind-blowing techniques that Pat Hawley did?
Oh, she was riveting. I learned so many things from her, but then she knocked my socks off when she was preparing the background fabric to put her applique on. No wonder she gets the ribbons. Take a look.
You are really known for your applique miniature quilts.
That's right.
And you've got some incredible tips, so let's just get started.
Okay, Ricky. All right.
So we don't jump to the last project, but let's look at this particular piece that you've got with the, is that a cockatoo or?
You know, it's a very fantastical bird.
It's a fantastical bird.
That's all I will say about that.
But I tell you what, don't look at the bird, everyone. I want the cameras to zoom in and Pat, tell us what we're really looking at.
What I like to do is create my own fabric to applique on, and so I have stitched the background, and you'll notice behind the bird and the flowers there's stitching. That's not the fabric.
You didn't buy it that way.
I didn't buy it that way. I made it myself, and I want to show you how to do that.
All right, where do we start?
Well, the first thing you do is you pick out your background fabric and then think about the stitches you want to place on that. Now, we all have these wonderful sewing machines now, and that's kind of what got me started doing this.
Not just the straight stitch necessarily.
Or the zigzag.
Right.
Although you can use those. But we have all those beautiful decorative stitches. And I thought, what can I do with those? And if you notice on your machine, there's those little pictures, and you're not really sure what it's going to look like when it's stitched. So I made myself a little sample book. And that's what Ricky's going to show us.
And it's perfectly labeled.
Well, I do love my little label maker. We can skip ahead of there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we move.
So I have stitched out stitches that I thought would look well on the background. And then when I'm ready to make a new fabric, I go to my little reference guide here and I say, oh, I think I really like that stitch.
And you know the number of that stitch because you've put it right there.
I keep it right on there. And these are stitched out exactly as they come from the machine. And you know you can always adjust the stitch width and length as well. You can mirror image things. So there's a lot more you can do with your stitches than just this.
Right, so that's the default.
That's correct.
Spectacular.
Right. And it's a great reference to have, and it's worth the time.
What, a couple of days maybe to do something like that?
It depends on how many stitches your machine has.
Okay. So. All right, but that's a great idea for getting started. And then, then
I thought, I want to play around with different color background fabrics and different thread choices. So here are just some fun little samples. You know, this one is good because it's very subtle. So you could kind of match your thread to your background. Or you can be wild and be very high contrast. Let's find that.
What do you think, folks? Is this incredible? It's incredible. Look at this.
That's a good one. Here.
Oh.
Well, and you know, you aren't limited to the decorative stitches. You can actually achieve cool plaid patterns with just the straight stitch by changing the thread color.
Yeah, and the same color.
Here we go. Here, this is just straight lines. So it's a very subtle background.
But changing the thread color.
Thread color.
And that really, I mean, and now you've created, you might have bought a very plain fabric, but it is not plain anymore.
And I also kind of got the idea I love looking at old textiles, and if you look at some of those, there's interesting things in the background.
It is, and I'm so glad you said old textiles because everyone, what's coming up later is all about some old textiles. That is fantastic.
Okay, so now that we've kind of figured out some stitches we want to do, we have to prepare our fabric. And the way I do that, this is like a machine embroidery technique, so you have to have a stabilizer. So I want to use something that I don't have to wash out or be worried about getting rid of. So I just use my simple spray starch. I go to the grocery store and buy whatever's cheap. That works fine.
That works for me.
And Ricky, feel how stiff that is. So it isn't just one coating. I spray it on, let it soak in, press it, spray again, and I repeat that maybe 4 or 5 times.
This is as stiff as my breeches after I wear them for about 12 days. So that's the recipe, everybody.
Is that like too much information?
TMI.
Okay, so now we're going to get ready to stitch. So we have to draw some guidelines.
Okay.
And I use my handy dandy see-through rulers, and I do like to use a marker that we can remove. So any of your pencils that you use to mark for your quilting designs.
So this is a fabric pencil marker.
Yes, because there are going to be places where you want to be able to remove them. So I've drawn some guidelines and diagonals, and I'm going to place these about 1/2 inch apart, and I'm going to line up my little ruler with that and draw this line.
Right, and as you're doing that, you've created sort of a cross grid, but you can do any design.
You can do anything that you can think of, any kind of a pattern. On the little block over there, I just do a kind of a wavy line and connected that. All right, now the thing I wanted to point out to you is instead of going, these are 1/2 inch apart, I'm not going to measure from the line I just drew. I'm going to kind of keep measuring from a baseline, so I'm going to go 1 inch from that.
All right, so
Because if you kept measuring from the, you would accumulate.
Right, don't move that for a second. Go back to where you were. This, now the
There
1
you
inch
go.
mark is
Right.
on top of the original baseline
So my next one, I'm going to move up a 1/2 inch
to
from
the inch and a
that.
half, and we're measuring now from the 1.5 inches. So you don't
Exactly.
continue to make the mistake larger and larger and larger if
and,
it was
and
to...
it kind of keeps them the same distance apart, which
That's
is what we want to do.
fantastic.
Okay,
All right.
so now we have that ready to go. So after we've drawn our lines, we're going to do the stitching. Now, this is when you want to put on some nice music, perhaps Ricky's new CD.
Oh, yes, my new CD, absolutely.
Because it's actually kind of a boring thing to do. But I do try to choose a stitch that can cover up that guideline, and then I go back in between those.
All right, so in this particular example, like that very cross mark had a pretty solid center, so you are covering up the
Cover
mark
up.
that you made.
And that's what your little samples, stitch samples helps you find those kind of stitches. They sort of have a center spine.
Right.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. And I see that squiggly thing, though, before you go on. That
Yeah.
squiggly, that's a preset.
That's one of the stitches that you can
And when you
find.
turn the corner, you just do whatever it wants to
You
do?
know what you do is you approach that one center guideline, stop there, and then pivot, and then stitch down.
Very
and
good.
wherever it ends up, that's
It just
what you
ends
get.
up, that's what you get.
That's what you get.
That's great. Okay. All right, now.
Okay, now that we have our background stitched, we need to work on preparing the applique pieces. So this is the little pattern that I've designed.
Look at that. Isn't that great?
Cute little birds. I do have
You
a thing
like,
about birds.
you do like birds and folky type birds many times.
Yeah. Well, I'm very inspired by sort of Indian designs as well. So I look at a lot of books that have those ideas. So because this is a fusible technique, we have to have a mirror image. Now this one, I have a right and a left. If I only had one of these, I would turn this over and trace my fusible from that side.
Right.
So once we've got that, oh, and another tip, I like to use this circle template. Do we want to go over to that
Yeah.
stuff?
You're going to cut out circles?
I think we should cut out
Well,
some circles.
let's go do that because you got some special tools that you
Yes.
use for cutting out circles.
Yes.
So let's just move down
Okay.
to where your circles are. I'll
I
bring
think
those
we need
with.
all of this stuff here.
All right. Because we need to get Aaron, Mr. Close-Up Camera,
Okay,
very close on all this.
okay. So I don't freehand draw little tiny circles. I use a circle template, which you can get at your office supply stores. And now I have my little circles that are ready to cut out. When using, or when doing these tiny little pieces, I figured out very quickly, my big fat fingers can't hang on to things. So I went back to my sort of science training and found tweezers.
Because
So
you worked in a laboratory.
I actually ran an electron microscope laboratory.
No wonder you like doing miniatures.
Yes, but I like doing little things even before that. So, all right. So what I've discovered is, as I'm cutting out, all right, this is where I have to take my
I'm
glasses
good.
off.
I'm good. Okay, now she's
Mm-hmm.
getting down there. No glasses. I'd be getting my glasses on like crazy right now.
Okay, so as I'm getting around, I can't hang on to that little tiny circle anymore. So I'm going to use these self-closing tweezers. So when I open them up, the little tips open apart, and I can actually hang on to that little circle.
Look at that.
And
Who
you
would have
know,
thought?
it's always easier when you're at home alone.
You know, it's all about the tools, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Seriously,
Okay.
it's all about the tools.
Okay.
Very good.
So after we do that, and then I also use these tweezers, the regular sort of sharp pointed tweezers, to pick things up and move them around.
And I noticed you were doing that even earlier. You just grabbing like
Yeah.
I grab with my
This
fingers,
is like
you grab
my
with the
little
tools.
extension. So I would like to show you how I stitched these.
Right, and
now that we're on
quickly
these.
tell us about this set of
well,
tools.
Well, when I was back in the biology lab, these kind of tweezers were extremely expensive. I mean, I remember having to go to the lab store and it was $40 for a nice pair of tweezers. We don't need quite that scientific quality for this. And I found this great set of tweezers that it runs about $10, and you get the self-closing tweezers, the very sharp pointed tweezers, and some bigger tweezers.
And if somebody wanted
Rope.
those, where could they find them?
I think if you went to my sister's website, she sells those at sue-nichols.com.
We'll put that on our website as well, so they can find
but
that.
It's a wonderful set.
All right, so it's time to sew.
Okay.
Oh, I'm getting nervous now. Where's my glasses?
Okay. Got your magnifiers.
Yeah, I've got to be able to see.
The thing about sewing these little pieces is they're small, so they don't really take as long. There's not that many trips around. You just have to go very slowly. And I use the blanket stitch, and I adjust the width and the length, and I do a little stitch out ahead of time so that I know that it's the size that I want.
Okay. That's
And
good.
the other important thing is keeping track of knowing exactly where you are, where your needle's coming down. After you've done about 100 of these, you
figure
really
it
know
out.
But if you're not really sure, you can
Hand turn
it so that I know where it's going to start.
Now you have to give
All
Pat
right.
some credit here because she's doing this standing up.
That's okay, I can do it. Now, when you have these circles, you want to try and have that zig-in stitch point to the center. So it involves a lot of stopping and pivoting. So I'm going to lift up the presser foot and pivot so that that stitch points towards the center. And when you're pivoting, something I also discovered, sometimes you can't really figure out where that next stitch is going to be. Look at the back of your presser foot and it will be parallel to that.
Ah,
When I
very
figured that out, I was
smart.
like, oh my
wow,
gosh.
very nice. Okay.
So I'm going to stop, pivot, turn. I'm
Now,
always pivoting in the background.
right, and you're having to raise the presser foot to do that pivot with the needle down on the right side. And you could do this with a hands-free system. Standing up, we can't.
Yeah.
But anybody with any sewing machine with a blanket stitch could do this.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Any special needle?
You pick your needle by the size of thread that you're using. So some of the finer threads, I would use a 70 needle. I like the sharp, Microtex sharp needles.
That's fantastic. And you pull that out and let Erin get a really good shot of that.
Good.
And
But
oh
see,
my.
that didn't take very
oh
long.
my. There's the pencil. Woohoo! I think that's fantastic. All right, it didn't take long,
It didn't take
but
long.
you have to take your time and go slow.
But that's about how fast I sew.
Yeah, that's
Kind
you
of
know
one
what? It's
stitch
not
at a
it's
time.
not much faster than by hand, but you have a different look. You've got a
Right.
machine stitched look
That's
to
right.
it. Okay.
That's right. Okay, so now we've got our little circles cut out. We've got all our little pieces cut out, and I like to assemble my whatever applique whether it's flowers or birds, into a little unit before I put it on the background. So I use one of these applique pressing sheets. As long as you can see through it, doesn't matter what kind it is. So I have my pattern down, the pressing sheets on top, and I'm going to arrange all of these little pieces.
I like the way you just immediately grabbed your tweezers
I do.
because
I
you're
use
so
it.
used to that.
And remember to take your paper off, because if you press it with the paper on, it won't stick.
That's right.
All of these things are because we've done it.
We've done it
So
before.
we're gonna
So
zoom ahead.
yeah, you've got
So
those
I arrange them all there, press them.
into one unit, which
One
looks
nice little unit.
to the magic of having done it before.
Yeah, here you
like
can have that.
Okay.
Okay, so here's one that's all ready. And something you can do before you put it on the background is if there's some interior areas, you can stitch those ahead of time.
Okay.
And then I also used a decorative stitch and added
Look at
this
that.
pretty little element there.
Again, using that embellishment and that added detail to go over the top. I mean, it really does add so much.
It's fun. It's
But now
very
your
fun.
applique, which is made out of many pieces, is all assembled into one piece.
Correct.
And then it's time to position it
Correct.
on, and I don't know how you even know where to put it.
Well, I have found sometimes you can, if your background is light color enough, you can slip it over. But then I just use my tracing paper pattern,
And you can see through.
and I can see through it, and then I can move these around.
Okay.
So then we fuse that down.
All right, so the decorative fabric was created, the appliques were created, the embellishment on that was created, and then you have got a fantastic way of doing borders. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's kind of a different idea. All of these miniatures are put together, and there's no actual piecing involved.
Can we get to one of these guys? Just to notice that it's kind of a medallion quilt with border upon border upon border, and yet none of those borders are pieced borders, right?
Right. So the center gold area is attached to this blue by this red frame. And this, likewise, this blue is attached to the gold with this red frame.
And that red frame is a square.
It's a square.
It's a square, yeah.
This one we have is a rectangle.
Okay.
So we have traced it onto the fusible, and this would need to be cut out. And I use a rotary cutter to cut them out.
Okay, so it was drawn,
Drawn on the fusible
Right.
web.
and you're going
fused
to
onto
cut
the
it
back.
out, fused, and you're going to cut it out
I'm going to cut on all
on
the lines.
lines
Right.
to give you
That. Let's try to.
that guy.
Okay, so we have our frame. Now, I want to expose just part of the fusible that's on this. So I'm going to take my scissors.
Excuse me for asking, but
sorry.
how do you know which part? Which part at this point?
I want to fuse into the interior, so I want to remove part of the fusible that's on the inside.
Okay, you're going to remove the paper from the fusible.
Paper from the
Okay.
fusible. So I just kind of separate the paper and slip my scissors in. Don't cut your fabric.
No.
And then we're going to continue all the way around.
So the idea is
So
to
we've
take off half of the
exposed
paper
fusible.
and leave another half of the paper.
And I would continue all the way around on the inside.
Okay, does everyone see that? You understand what she's doing there? Okay, she's just removing it from the interior.
Okay.
All right, I get it.
Then I would take that and place it onto my background and
let's bring
fuse it.
And then that's
And we
this
have
guy.
this. Okay, so see how this is fused, and then I've stitched along the interior.
All right, I'm going to look again. There we go. I see this. This guy, the green, has been fused to this guy, which actually was to the whole piece.
Yep.
Right, like so.
Got that?
Fused.
Fused.
And then
Now I'm going to turn this over, and then I'm going to cut away all of that extra. So I've cut. And this is where you want to be kind of careful because you don't want to cut your frame.
I bet you've done that before too.
You know, I have not
Oh, well, good. Well,
because I'm very careful.
I know because you worked in a microtechnology lab.
Yes, I did. and then I would do. I'm not going to do that right now, but I would have cut out this little area and then inserted this little pink. But
Okay.
now I can take away this paper,
Exposing the other part of the
Just do that.
fusible.
turn this over,
Look at that.
and we could even just slip that in there.
Yeah, it's a kind of a little reverse applique technique. If you've got a little hole, slide a little piece of fabric in there, and that doesn't even have to be fused fabric. It
No,
can just be
right.
under there.
So now we would iron that down and then stitch around that. So
That is
and then I
spectacular.
would cut away that extra red fabric from behind it.
That is
And
fantastic.
there's so many places you can use that. A lot of my little quilts, I've used that idea. Because they're little, I didn't want that extra seaming fabric in there.
Do you not love that? Spectacular. Thank you, Pat.
Well, now you can see why Pat Hawley is the master of miniature quilts. So much great advice right there.
Well, Alex, you have a lot of great advice coming up because you're going to teach us how to stitch down some machine applique. But then we also get to visit with Suzanne Marshall, who's one of my personal mentors and cheerleaders. Amazing applique technique by hand. Both of those coming up right after the break. Welcome back, everyone. You know, we spend a lot of time preparing applique, however you prepare it to get ready to stitching it. In this next little segment, Alex is going to show you how she actually finishes turned edge machine applique with a really, really good precision, wonderful technique. Take a look at this.
Before we went to break, we prepared our applique, correct?
Right.
And I used the spray starch method.
Right.
Okay. Now here is my little background that I'm going to do my little daisy chain on. And because it's such a simple little applique block, I iron my block just corner to corner, and that is how I'm going to position these little daisies on, and I really don't lose sleep over the whole deal.
Okay, so they don't have to be absolutely perfect.
No, I
You've
just
got a nice guideline.
Right, I want to make sure, okay, maybe I would push them in more now.
Okay, because they look like they're lingering out there.
Exactly. Now, how I attach my applique is with Roxanne's glue. It is a water-soluble glue. I love it. I prepare sometimes a whole applique piece with this stuff, and then it's all ready to go. It's really cool. It comes out of this tip here. One of the problems with this particular brand is that this tip gets gunky and then clogged. And so when I am done using the glue, love this tip. Well, this one's full.
Well, that part of that is the altitude you're at.
Oh, really? I will go like this. I will kind of burp it. I'll bring the glue all the way to the top, screw the lid on, and then have it come down, and it will suck it all down.
That sucks it all back down. That is a great tip. I didn't know that.
Right, and then of course she has a little one that you can take to your workshops.
Okay.
So I'm going to glue on now.
Okay, go ahead and glue. And while you're gluing, I want to ask you a question. When you're working on your applique, will you like do all of your circles and then do all of your petals and then like fold all of your little squares so that you're kind of getting things, you're just repeating the same thing over so that you end up with 30 or 40 or 60 blocks ready to stitch down? Or do you do one block at a time from start to
look,
finish?
I got glue. Lucky thing it's water soluble. You know what I do, Ricky, is when I start any quilt, I will start kind of with a gaggle of blocks, but I won't do them all, because then you want to put the block on your design wall and look at it and see how the colors are doing. So I guess in answer to your question, the answer is no.
Okay.
It gives you more control over the outcome.
Well, I was thinking about Sue Garman whenever she was visiting.
Oh, she does it all.
She just kind of gets everything all assembly lined, ready to go.
I'll do a bunch of them.
Okay,
but then
you
step
can,
back.
yeah, okay, all right.
All right, I want to talk about stitches on a sewing machine. I am a hand person.
When did you switch to doing a machine?
Probably we're working on this particular quilt, and it probably took about an hour and a half to get good at it.
Okay, and I said the wrong word. You didn't switch. You've just added
Both.
it to your
It's
toolbox.
to my repertoire. Okay. Usually when you take a applique class from somebody, see, I can't speak either, people say you use the blind hem stitch for machine applique. The blind hem stitch is little bite, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, little bite, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're usually instructed to shrink this up to 1 for width and shrink this up to 1 for length.
Right,
all right?
okay.
Well, on my Bernina, I always thought I was using the very overlock. The blind hem, I was using what's called the very overlock stitch. And it's usually at the top row of your menu. It's bite, 1, 2, 3, bite, 1, 2, 3. So you don't end up with all these threads in there, all right?
Those extra stitches.
Right. However, I'm writing a book on machine and hand applique, and I've called other manufacturers, and there are so many stitches out there that you can play with. For instance, on one brand, you could go bite, straight in, straight out, 1, 2, bite, straight in, straight out, 1, 2. So it's important to really play with your machine and understand what it has to offer you.
Right, but on those, I do want to say on those forward stitches, you can adjust that so your bites are really close together and you hardly even notice those forward stitches.
Right.
You have to just kind of determine how you're...
Right. Play with your machine. You've spent a lot of money on your machine, now play with it. I use 2 different stitches. I use the straight stitch, that's what I stop and start with, and I shrink it down to very, very small. And again, I do the very overlock stitch, and I do that 1 width, 1 length.
Okay, 1 and 1.
I use an open toe foot,
Okay.
and I always justify my needle position all the way to the right, which
Okay.
I'm going to do right here. I'm going to start with a really tight straight stitch down in here.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to get in here.
And that's actually going to be under your circle later, right?
So it really doesn't matter, to tell you the truth. How do I do needle up, needle down on this one?
I got needle down already.
Okay, oh, love you. All right, I'm going to put down, as far as thread goes, you can use like a monopoly. In this case, I'm using a neutral. That's just totally up to you. So I'm going to do a little bit of straight stitch. I'm using the side of the presser foot as my guide of where the applique is going to be.
All right.
Now I'm going to go over to my very overlock stitch, and I'm going to start working my way around.
Now, have you reversed that very overlock stitch?
Thank you, I did. And I'll tell you, now is when I would just wish I had my knee lift, my freehand system, but it's impossible.
It's not the machine's fault today, it's the way we have our cabinet
Right,
built.
so let me work my way around.
Well, it proves why a knee lift or a hands-free system is so critical, because you're having to reach back every few stitches to raise that presser foot, and the hands-free system allows you to easily do that.
Okay, now let me say this. I am not going to do every single petal, but you get the gist of the whole thing, right?
Absolutely.
And the other thing I'll do, that like I won't necessarily go to this, I'll jet across it. I'll show you this.
Oh, she's so excited, I can see.
Wow, here I go. And I'll tell you, at first, when I did my machine, oops, get down there, you crazy little piece. When I first did my machine applique, honestly, it took an hour. Unlike my Machine quilting took me 150 hours because I didn't use the Bernina stitch regulator.
So making the switch from doing something from hand to machine was pretty easy for you.
And can I tell you something right now is that when you first do the stitching, you'd say, oh man, those stitches really work or show. But once you do them and quilt it, I'm sorry, that doesn't even make sense. Once you quilt the quilt, it all but disappears. Okay, so let's pretend I've done everything.
Okay.
Okay, then I'm going to take my circle, I'm going to position it.
Do you glue baste it or you just...
Probably just stick it there in this case, yeah.
And there you go.
And then down.
So you come up to the final one,
Whoop.
and then pivot and start going around. I can see that.
Exactly.
Wow, so you could do all of those petals and the circle without stopping and breaking your thread or cutting your thread.
And then, so when it's all said and done, okay, this is gonna kind of come out wrong, so forgive me. I don't really worry about the really perfect way to finish it up because this is how some people pull all the threads to the back and all that. I just go back to my straight stitch, which is really tight, take a couple stitches and call it a day.
Okay.
Okay, I mean...
And do you finally pull that top thread to the back or no?
I don't.
You don't?
But I tell you, Ricky, I don't really make quilts for competition. I make them for pleasure.
Sure.
I'd rather get it finished and then go on.
That's great.
Okay, so
what do you
that's how I
think
do
about that? That's great. I could do that.
Yes, you can.
Anybody could do that. That's the beauty of it. Anybody could do that.
Anybody. Oh, and if you have not yet learned machine applique, you are really missing the boat. One of the many nice things of machine applique is that it frees up more of your time to work on more applique.
Well, I do think that machine applique goes fast, but there's a lot of love in a hand applique project. Our next guest is Suzanne Marshall, who I've already mentioned is one of my cheerleaders. I love her to death. But she showed us 2 cool tips, one on how to do some bias strips, and she uses a really expensive tool. It's called notebook paper to make her applique lined up perfectly. You don't want to miss this cool tip.
I really want to tell you about the bias, though.
Okay, I understand that this is one of the favorite things that in your classes the students want to know about.
Yes. Notice all the bias stems that I have in this quilt. I had a lot of bias, and guess what? I don't have bias bars or whatever those gadgets are
No
that people
fancy
use.
gadgets.
No fancy gadgets for my bias.
So would you share with us how you do it?
I will be glad to.
Okay.
All right, we'll move our birds here.
All right.
Well, let's put the embroidered one on top.
Okay. And I knew I was going to do this. Did you see what I did?
Did you unthread
see-
my needle? Are you going to thread it for me?
You do this, and I'm going to work on threading it, okay?
All right. Most people, when they do bias, cut a strip. I do not cut a strip. I make my bias cut, and I leave it on the whole piece of cloth. You know, obviously you might want to have a larger piece of cloth if you're making longer bias, but for this demo, I will just show you
a short one.
Short
okay.
one.
So what do you do first?
Okay, first thing you do, while he threads that
I'm
needle,
getting it threaded. There we go. I did it.
is press under a 1/4 inch fold. And it's easy to press, I say, as I fiddle around with it.
That's just the nature of the beast.
Because it is on a whole piece of cloth. And therefore, it is stabilized by that whole piece of cloth.
Okay.
If I had a strip, it would be stretching and, you know, carrying on and having to fit.
So you can all see that that's just been slightly turned over, right? All right, so now
Right.
what's next?
Okay, next thing you do is determine how wide you want your bias to be. Do you want a little bitty 1/8 of an inch piece of bias?
Wow.
Do you want a 1/4 inch piece of bias, which is closer to what I used for the frog quilt or the toad quilt?
Toad boy.
Toad boy. Or you could have 1/2 an inch piece of bias. It
can-
varies. You
yeah.
can have any width that you want.
You're not bound to a particular size.
That's right. So this next fold that you make is the final width of bias that you want. And once again, it's very, very easy to press because it's stabilized by the whole piece of cloth.
I have a question. Is it possible to have it wider and get narrower? Have you ever tried
You know,
that?
I've not tried that.
That'd be something to think about.
Well, it would.
We'll just have to put that one out there.
This is the innovative guy here.
All right, so then what?
All right, then you take your needle and thread. I have to admit to you that for the bias on the toad quilt, I went over to my Bernina sewing machine. I lengthened the stitch and made the bias stitch work on it and just sewed right down the middle of the fold.
With the sewing
With
machine.
the sewing
And
machine.
you're doing it by hand, so
I'm doing
both
it by
work
hand,
just
but
fine?
look how quickly this goes.
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't take very long.
This is the way I used to quilt, by the way.
Well, it's the way I still quilt. Oh, you mean with these
Well,
big
yeah,
stitches?
yeah, the big
Well, my
stitches.
first quilt has stitches like
That's
this,
just the
too.
way it all
Okay,
is, isn't
yeah.
it?
But you know what? If you have just a little bit, that doesn't take too long to do.
It doesn't. Okay, so
Next
then
thing
what?
you do, I bet you can guess. You turn it and you cut that off. Now, see, I'm nervous. I'm
No, don't.
shaking while I'm cutting this off.
So you just cut it right
I'm
there.
cutting it off of the whole piece of cloth.
Can you see all that? Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah, cutting it right back.
And then, when I'm finished cutting it off, I can manipulate my finished piece of bias any way I want it, and it's all turned under, it's all ready to go, it's all basted.
That's
it.
really cool. That's great. I do want to talk, I want you to talk about these scissors a little bit.
Oh,
Just-
okay. You know, after 9/11, we couldn't travel with scissors. And I thought, oh dear, what can I do? I have got to sew on the airplane. I just have to. I went to the drugstore and I bought Revlon, cut the baby fingernail scissors.
And these go right through security, is that right?
I took them out. You know, now you can travel with scissors.
Okay.
But before, and even now, I might take them out, put them in the little basket, say I have scissors, and they look and they say, oh, that's okay.
That's great.
Because they're just 1-inch long blades and that perfectly blunt end on them.
That's great. All right, you've got another technique we're going to talk
I
about.
do.
This is your trademark applique. This
Okay.
is called, what do you call
Take
this?
away applique.
Take away applique. We're going
Okay.
to move Toad Boy out of the way and reveal this wonderful little
Right.
daffodil block
And that
you've
daffodil
made.
is also on Journey Through Time.
Right, but this is a teaching sample that you've got,
It
right?
is, right.
All right,
Okay, so here is my pattern for the daffodil.
all right.
I take a piece of lined notebook paper, and you may say, well, why lined notebook paper?
Well, I should say that, Suzanne. Why lined notebook paper?
Well, number one, it's cheap. Number
This
two,
gives you the opportunity to buy more fabric, right?
right.
All right.
number two, almost everybody has it lying around the house.
Right.
And number three, it has lines on it.
Okay.
And I actually used the lines on the notebook paper to match the grain line of the fabric of my applique piece.
Okay.
Because, in fact, if you look at these quilts, all the grain lines match. And you may think, well, why? Because have you ever appliqued down one side of a leaf and then you come back down the other side and it warps?
It warps, yes.
Right. It won't do that if you match the grain line. Because think about it. If you're appliquing on the bias part of an applique piece, and it's on the straight grain part of the background, the applique piece is stretching away from the background.
Sure.
And
when you-
vice versa.
And when you come back the other way, it starts wanting to
Well,
warp.
everything is warping.
All right, so the
if
grain-
they're all moving or not moving together, then everything lays down
flat.
flatter.
So the ruled notebook paper, which you have not trademarked that design yet, right?
No.
I mean, not the tulip design, the ruled lines. She's not trademarked those ruled lines yet.
No, my first book was Take Away Applique, though, which is this technique.
Sure, all right,
So I traced that on the lined notebook paper. I cut the daffodil out of the lined notebook paper, and I do not cut the pieces apart. Sometimes people cut their applique pieces apart and then they work it again like a jigsaw puzzle.
Okay, but you leave
But
it
I
all
want
together.
to show you what I do. So we're going to start, this is going to be my background. The applique piece is going to go on the background like this.
Okay.
And I'm going to determine what the first piece should be that I'm going to applique. And I'm going to pick something that's behind everything else. So I think I'll start with this
So
one.
back in the back.
Right.
Start in the
So
back.
I'm going to cut that off.
All right. Hold it right there for
Right
Aaron
there.
to get.
I'm cutting it off.
And you know your grain lines because you've got your blue ruled
And
marks.
that's right. Here's my little piece of fabric. I'm going to line up the lines on the notebook paper with the grain line of the fabric.
And what's the
I am
advantage
going
for
to
this little piece of foam
pin
core?
it to the foam board like this.
Now I see. So it's
so
not going to
it
slide.
doesn't wiggle.
There you go. Wow, pretty
Okay.
simple.
Then I'm going to draw around it with a pencil that I can see because that is going to show me where to turn it under for my applique.
Do you have various pencils for
Do you
light or
know,
dark or so
my
forth?
favorite pencil, and I have to tell you that I have marked my quilting with this too on dark fabrics, is the soft white Prismacolor pencil made by Sanford, sold in art stores.
Okay, well, we'll remember that. We'll put that on the
Okay.
website for everybody.
Okay, so I'm drawing around all the sides.
All right.
Now, do you want me to cut this out? Or
Do go ahead and cut it
Okay.
out because I think they need to know that there is seam allowance involved, or at least get it
Right.
started.
We're not going to cut on the line. we're going to leave a little seam allowance that I'm going to turn under for my applique.
Do you care how much that is?
I like for it to be, for people who are just starting out anyway, a little less than a fourth and a little more than an eighth. And the
Okay.
part that's tucked under everything else, I leave much wider. That just sort of allows for any kind of mistakes.
All right, so that's
Okay.
getting cut out, and
All
that's
right.
going to become your first piece in your
That's
block.
right. And see, I have taken one piece of paper away.
Oh, you did take that away. Yeah.
That was my template. This is going to fit in the exact spot where the paper was taken away.
That's perfect. Perfect alignment. And then
So
you can turn
there's
under.
no guesswork.
Turn under the edges that need to be stitched down, and then
Right.
the edges that don't get stitched down are left.
That's right.
Is that right?
So
All right.
let's just give you a little example here. We're going to cut off another piece. Let's cut this one off,
And then
because that goes behind
the tulip or
the
the
rest of the
blossom,
tulip.
the part of the
Now
blossom.
see, I can always put this back in the same place, oops, because it lines up with those lines.
And then you can do the
And
next one.
then, you see, I can put this in the exact place where the paper was cut away.
And then
So
you-
there's no guesswork as to where anything goes. I didn't have to mark my background.
That's great.
And so I don't know whether you want to run through all these pieces. We don't
Well,
really
let's
need
look at
to.
this next piece because
Right.
we've got all this, the layouts. So this is whenever
Oops,
you're getting
do it like this.
more and more basting. You've
So
got
I've
your
put some basting on that to hold it all down.
and there's things that you've got to stitch before you go
Right.
further.
So look, as you go along, things have been done. This much has not been done. I would probably cut this piece off next.
Right.
And then eventually you get to one piece left.
And when
then,
you stitch it down, boom,
ta-da.
da-da-da-da-da-da. Is that good? Do you like that?
Okay.
You know, one of the things that I like about this technique is you're not having to use some see-through material to get everything positioned. It all stays positioned while you're working on the project.
Yeah.
Wow, Ricky, I can see why Suzanne is one of your best mentors. Just think about that. This was taped early on, maybe 12 years ago. It was in Levita. And these tips that she gives, they're just timeless. I mean, that notebook paper to keep all the grain lines straight, completely genius.
Yeah, I think that's genius. But Alex, you brought some great stuff to the table too. And, you know, the thing of it is that we've had the TQS community has grown, we've grown, but also we're so lucky to have a treasure trove of artists and teachers that have been on the Quilt Show for all of these years. It's absolutely been a thrill, and I've learned so much. I know that you have too, Alex.
Completely. Honestly, it's changed my quilting style. It's been fabulous. So we will carry on, right, Mr. Timms?
We absolutely will carry on, and we hope that you that are watching will carry on with us. And as you carry on, always remember, it's a new day every day.
Every day. Bye-bye.